Hey guys, Buildzoid here from Actually Hardcore Overclocking, and today we're going to be taking a look at the RTX 3080 FTW3 PCB from EVGA. Now, I'm not really a huge fan of what EVGA has done here with the FTW3, especially compared to like past FTW series cards where you'd get some pretty significant component upgrades over a reference PCB, and then there's like, and by that I mean like the 2080 Ti FTW, the 2080 FTW, like 1080 FTW, 1080 Ti FTW. There's been a lot of FTW cards which I've been very impressed with, and then there's this one where it's like you took a reference PCB and then you stretched it.
Before that, this video is brought to you by EK Water Blocks and its RTX 30 series Vector Water Blocks. The EK Quantum Vector blocks include options for Founders Edition 3080 and 3090 cooling, Asus TUF and Strix 3080 blocks, EVGA XC3 and FTW3 blocks, and more. EK has blackout, acrylic, and RGB blocks available, including new special edition blocks with minimalistic aesthetics. Learn more at the link in the description below.
And that in and of itself wouldn't necessarily be that much of a problem because the reference PCB from NVIDIA offers the options to upgrade a bunch of the components with better components. Except EVGA hasn't even done that. They've basically taken a reference card, stretched it, and that's about it. This is like the highest end 3080 SKU from EVGA. So where's the high end component choices? This is kind of like what I'm questioning with this card design. So let's get into it. In typical 30 series fashion, we've got 2 rows of power delivery on either side of the GPU core. The larger of the 2 rows is made up of a memory phase right at the bottom. Then above that, we have 3 phases of Uncore power. And then above that, all of this is V-Core. And I'm not sure how many phases that is because there's a kind of weird number of power stages relative to how many phases the different voltage controllers have. So yeah, I'm really not sure how many phases we have on this side of the PCB. Then we have a memory phase over here. And then on the other side of the card, we've got memory power. The first phase is memory. Then we've got, I'm assuming 4 phases of V-Core. Again, I'm not sure. If I had the card in hand, I could check, but I'm working off of pictures as I'm located in the UK and Gamers Nexus is in the US. Then we have this missing memory phase, which honestly, I don't care that much about it, but it's worth noting that there are other 3080s that cost similar, like some of them cost less, some of them cost more, that do actually have this memory phase populated. Not that it really matters, it's just kind of one of those things, again, it's like, it's supposed to be a high-end 3080 SKU. Where's my extra memory phase? Now, normally the main reason that phase exists is, as far as I'm aware, is for the 3090 because that has more VRAM, but still, it's like, it wouldn't hurt by being populated. And then these 3 phases down here are more Uncore power. So, in terms of the actual power stage counts, that's basically where the FTW3 excels. We've got V-Core running 13 of them, which is why I'm so confused about how many phases we have on this side, because it's just like, yeah, that doesn't work with doublers, and the thing is, it's not new. We've seen this on 2080 Ti's. It's just like, I didn't really think, like, I haven't really gotten my hands on any recent modern, like, high-end NVIDIA GPUs, so I don't know how this is actually implemented. And it's also unique to NVIDIA GPUs. You don't see this on AMD cards. Then for Uncore power, we've got 6 power stages, which is so this is a really big upgrade over what you normally see on a reference 3080. Uncore with the 6 power stages is a slight upgrade over what you normally see. And then for memory power, we've got 3 power stages, which is the same as what you normally see on a 3080. So no upgrade there, and that's not really a big deal. But again, it's like, I'm paying extra for this card. I expect extra everywhere. Anyway, so yeah, the power stage counts is kind of where the card is strongest. And now we get to the actual disappointments. So the first disappointment with this card is the choice of voltage controllers. For whatever reason, EVGA went with the UP9511s, and the UP9511 is a perfectly good voltage controller if you're not an extreme overclocker, because this thing goes up to 8 phases, so that's, plenty of phases. Goes up to 600 kilohertz switching frequency, which is something you, like, if you're a normal user, you can't adjust this, so it's just going to run at whatever it comes at from the box. And normally that's going to be 300 or 500 kilohertz, depending on what the manufacturer decides to do with it. And I'd assume with this card, it's probably 300 kilohertz. And this controller is also completely analog. And the reason why this controller is disappointing to me is because on a lot of other cards that are around this price point, you'll have a UP9512, which is a straight upgrade from the 9511 because it also has 8 phases, but it goes up to 1.2 megahertz switching frequency. It's not like it's super beneficial to be able to go up to 1.2 megahertz because normally once you get that high switching frequencies, the VRM just gets really, really inefficient. But the option to go up to, say, 800 kilohertz, in my opinion, is welcome. And also that controller has a I2C interface, so if you wanted to, you could control the card using something like an Elmore Labs EVC2 voltage controller, and it makes life so much easier than dealing with the 9511 where you need to, like, load line, you need to hard mod it, voltage control, hard mod it. And actually, the EVC2 is still a type of hard mod, but it's a lot simpler to do than, you know, fiddling with resistors for switching frequency and potentiometers for your core voltage, and then like depending on how you want to do your load line settings, you can do load line over a potentiometer or through a switch and some resistors, or just with one resistor if you want to, if you don't want to actually be able to control the load line at all. So basically, the UP9511 is just kind of like this is the bare minimum of what you would expect to see in terms of voltage controllers on an RTX 3080, as in this is literally the controller you get on the cheapest 3080s. And I find that really disappointing, especially because as far as I can tell, this portion of the card right here up to around there, and really I think it wraps all the way around to like here, this seems to all be based very closely to the reference card, and also you'll notice there is a lot of unpopulated component pads in this area. And the reason for that is the reference PCB is specifically designed so that you can swap out a whole bunch of different voltage controllers without making any major adjustments to the PCB. It's like you don't have to have a new PCB. You want a 9512 instead of the 9511. You just put a 9511 and change how the components are populated. You want there's some NCP controller that I can't remember the name of. You can have that too. I think you can probably even stick an MP2888 onto the same footprint as the 9511 and then just shuffle around resistors and capacitors to make it work again. And so the thing is just like EVGA has a PCB that, as far as I can tell, definitely should have the option to run a better voltage controller, and they just didn't on what is supposed to be a high-end 3080, and it's just like bare minimum in terms of voltage controllers. And they're using the UP9511 for every single rail, which that's not really that big a deal. It would be weirder if you had like a 9512 on one rail and then everything else was 9511s. That would actually be really weird. But yeah, so you have 2 more 9511s on the back. I'm not sure which controller is for which rail, but they all have the same feature set. So the one for VCore is running in 8-phase mode. The one for Uncore is running 6-phase mode. The VCore one is doing something weird to get the 13 power stages, but the Uncore and the memory one are just running 6 and 3-phase mode, which, you know, there's nothing weird going on with that. And yeah, so that's the controller choices, and it's just like for what is supposed to be a high-end 3080, 9511s are rather disappointing. I'm pretty sure EVGA could still just do like an FTW3 revision 2, or like, you know, just do a revision where they just change the component selection, because I'm pretty sure that this is copy-pasted off of the reference card. And there are cards using the reference PCB with a 9512 and an NCP something controller as well. Let's talk about the actual power stages that these controllers are controlling. So for the power stages, EVGA is going with the Alpha and Omega Semiconductor AOZ 53, and I'm going to end up in the blue, and that's not going to work. So 5311 NQI, 50 amp DRMOS components. This is what you get on basically all of the 3080s, as in reference 3080s. And there's nothing really wrong with these, mostly because EVGA is using a hell of a lot more of them than most other cards, so the actual power handling capacity of this VRM is really, really high because there's freaking 13 power stages instead of the usual 8 in VCore and 6 instead of 5 in Uncore. But yeah, there's no upgrade to these either, but that's fine. They're perfectly good power stages. I don't see a problem with that. It's just kind of like, you know, they're also the same thing you'd get on a reference card. The combination of the really high power stage count combined with these power stages means that the actual efficiency of this VRM is similar to the Founders Edition. So for 1 volt output voltage at 300 kilohertz switching frequency, and I'm assuming this runs at 300 kilohertz because that's normally the frequency used for higher VRM efficiency. You can get some small voltage regulation advantages with higher switching frequencies, which is again why it's like I would have preferred it if we had a controller that could go up to 1.2 megahertz, because if you're an extreme overclocker, who knows, maybe on LN2 going from 300 or 500 kilohertz all the way up to a megahertz, which probably is a bad idea, but maybe say 800 kilohertz or something, translates into like 30 megahertz more core clock, which is pretty useful if you're trying to, get the first place in 3D Mark and you're losing to the guy in first place by 10 megahertz. So that's kind of the thing, is just like, yeah, I'm not a fan of that controller. Anyway, 300 kilohertz switching frequency for efficiency, 200 amps output. This VRM will produce about 15 watts of heat. For comparison, the Founders Edition should be producing about 17 watts of heat. And what's also worth noting is that since this is 13 power stages instead of the Founders Edition's 9, not only do you have similar efficiency, right? 15 watt, well, slightly better efficiency on this PCB, but the thing is, this does have 4 more power stages, which means there's the heat is spread over significantly more surface area. Therefore, the operating temperature should be significantly lower, even if both VRMs had the same amount of cooling, just because this one has lower thermal density. So basically, this VRM is better at cooling itself than the Founders Edition VRM is. For 300 amps output, this VRM will produce about 29 watts of heat, which is like 1 watt better than what you'd be getting on the Founders Edition. And again, keep in mind, larger VRM is going to have a slight thermal dissipation advantage. And then for 400 amps output, this VRM is going to produce about 48 watts of heat, which is basically the same as the 49 watts of heat that the Founders Edition probably makes. Which basically, like, I would actually just straight up consider that the same. Like 1 watt between the two, that's not really a difference. So yeah, in terms of the VRM, like the V-Core here is very, very powerful. That's the thing. Like that's the one we have a very powerful VRM just controlled by a kind of, low, like the controller controlling the VRM is just not that great. The VRM itself is actually really good. Or, well, it's a combination of factors, but still. Like, they should just swap it to a 9512, and like that, one of my biggest complaints for the card is gone. Anyway, then we've got the Uncore VRM down below, and that's a 6-phase, and the thing is that's still using the same 50 amp DRMOS component, so this is actually weaker than what you get on the Founders Edition, but it's stronger than what you get on all of the different reference cards. For 150 amps output, the Uncore VRM will probably produce about 15 watts of heat, and this is again assuming the same operating parameters. And for 200 amps output, it will probably produce about 24 watts of heat. So the issue here is I actually have no idea how much power has to go through the Uncore VRM compared to the V-Core. So I don't know if this is bad or if this is good. But it's more than what you get on a reference card, so, it's definitely better than that. Like, you get more power stages than what you get, and more phases than what you get on a reference card, so that's an upgrade there. For memory power, we're looking at the same 3-phase, like, exact same 3-phase that you would get on a reference card. And so 30 amps output, you're going to be looking at about 3 watts of heat. And the difference between, like, this is going to be at 1.35 volts output voltage instead of the usual 1 volt. But anyway, it doesn't really make a massive difference. 45 amps output, it's going to be producing about 4 watts of heat. And 60 amps output, it's going to be producing about 6 watts of heat. So yeah, similar efficiency to what you would get on most of the other 3080s out there. So really nothing to complain about there. And we also have the usual scattered memory VRM layout, which is just to improve the power distribution between all of the memory chips. It's not really, like, it doesn't really do anything for the operating temperature, because the memory VRM's operating temperature is going to be more dependent on, like, how hot the V-Core near it is, right, and how hot the rest of the PCB is. But the reason why you have all the phases in, like, different corners around the memory is to improve the power distribution to all of the memory chips. Anyway, so that's the power delivery on the FTW3, and That's like one of the strong points of the card. Like, we've got a really strong V-core, we've got a solid Uncore as far as I can tell, and you have a memory VRM that isn't any worse than what you would normally get. It's just that we also have like the most basic voltage controller you could possibly get on a 3080. So, I'm pretty disappointed with that. Or actually, you could say very disappointed considering how much I keep ripping on the UP9511s on this. Anyway, moving on, other features that EVGA has added, they've added a bunch of input protection fuses. So we have 3 over here, which I assume are all for the 8 pins, and then on the back of the card, we've got one more fuse down here for the PCIe slot. Now, if the fuse fails, that doesn't mean that the card is, like, you don't replace the fuse and the card starts working. That's not what the fuse is for. The fuse is there to prevent further damage occurring when something else fails. So let's say you have like one of the power stages blows up. If you didn't have the fuses, that power stage could suck up a lot of energy before your power supply detects it as a overcurrent protection or a short circuit protection event. And, well, as it's sucking up energy, it's producing heat, and it's causing further damage to the PCB. So the fuses are there to hopefully blow before, you have a failed component elsewhere on the card cause more damage to the card. They aren't there to basically they're there to help people trying to repair the card. They're not there to prevent failures from occurring. They're there to mitigate further damage caused by failures. So, but still a nice little feature for, it's a nice feature for sort of like, I guess, repairing the card. But as an end user, the fuses really don't do much for you. Under most, they really don't do much for you. Like, honestly, if the card, because the thing is, if you have a card where the power stage dies and it doesn't have fuses, and you have a card where the power stage dies and it does have fuses, you're still not able to repair the power stage, as 90%, 99.9% of people still won't be able to repair the power stage, so the card is still bricked. But when you send it into RMA, EVGA actually has a chance of saving the PCB instead of having to deal with a crater that's several layers deep. At least that's the goal with having those fuses. Other than that, the card also has a dual BIOS switch, which is certainly a nice feature to have on the 30, on high-end GPUs, because if you want to mess around with flashing BIOSes that don't belong on your card onto your card, you can. And it's relatively risk-free, because if you break one of your BIOS chips, you can just boot on the other one and then fix the other, and then go back to the bricked BIOS chip once you're in Windows and flash over it again. So that's super helpful if you want to mess around with BIOS flashing, but there's other cards that also have dual BIOS. So it's like that's the thing, is just like, this card, if there was no other manufacturers, would actually be a really, if you only had the options of Reference Card, Founders Edition, and the FTW3, this would actually make a lot of sense. But unfortunately, there's also companies like Asus, mostly Asus. I can't really think of any other PCBs I've seen that I've been so impressed with yet. Colorful actually has a pretty interesting 3080 PCB, but they're not really an option if you're in America or Europe. So, yeah, but the thing is, there's other options where, you wouldn't have the UP9511 controllers, for example, and you'd still get the dual BIOS functionality. Anyway, for current monitoring, we have the standard NVIDIA US 5650s. So we have one over here, and then we have another US 5650 on the back over here. There's 2 of these chips because each of them monitors up to 4 shunts, and this card has more than 4 shunts. You've got 4 shunts right over here, then there's a 5th one over there, there's another shunt down here. I don't know why NVIDIA GPUs need this many freaking shunts. There's another shunt there. I'm not sure how many of them are necessary to short out. There's another one over here, and then we have one down here for the PCIe slot. This is basically what you normally get on an NVIDIA GPU in terms of shunts. I'm really not sure why NVIDIA does this, considering you've got 4 power inputs. You should be able to monitor all of the power inputs with just 4 shunts. You really shouldn't need, what is this, 9? I think it's 9. Yeah, it's 9 shunts. You really shouldn't need 9, but NVIDIA and overly complicated power management schemes are the most typical NVIDIA thing ever. So yeah, that's the current monitoring. Now, it is worth noting that this entire video is done on a pre-release version of the PCB of the 3080 FTW3. So you might be looking at this going like, oh no, it's got the bad capacitors. Yeah, EVGA fixes that. For like, if you actually buy one of the FTW3s, you're going to get a group of multi-layer ceramics over here and a group of multi-layer ceramics over here. However, you can also get other cards from other manufacturers which will have the two groups of multi-layer ceramics and then slightly increased capacities on the SP caps. You can also find cards which don't use any SP caps at all. How much that actually impacts, overclocking, I'm really not sure. Like, there's going to be an upper limit to how much you can upgrade the capacitors before it stops improving the overclocking. And unless you have an oscilloscope, there's really no good way. Like, you'd need to take an oscilloscope measurement to see, how far is too far in terms of upgrading the capacitors behind the GPU core. And on that note, also the capacitors coming directly off of the VRM. I am really not a fan of through-hole capacitors on high-end GPUs. Because the thing is, like, your through-hole, like they have the option to use the SMD polymers, right? And instead, we've just got these regular through-hole APAC capacitors. And that's the other thing is, like, this is APAC, okay? Like, this is the kind of capacitor I expect to see on a $100 motherboard, not an $800 GPU. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with these. They're 5,000 hours at 105 degrees. They're going to last forever. Like, they're polymers. That's the other thing is, like, polymers don't fail like your liquid electrolyte capacitors do. So they don't fail anywhere near as dramatically. But the thing is, in terms of ESL, they're significantly inferior to, say, SP caps like this. And you'll actually notice that the memory gets SP caps for its bulk filtering because the memory is apparently a bit more sensitive to power delivery. It might be a combination of factors like heatsink clearance and required capacitance. But the thing is, SP caps, like your SMD polymers like that, have better ESL. They can also have better ESR. And so in terms of power filtering, they are just better than your through-hole polymer capacitors. They're also way more expensive. And so it's obvious why EVGA didn't replace the entire bulk filter, like the bulk output capacitors of the V-core and the Uncore and the memory with just SP caps. But at the same time, it's like this is a high-end 3080. I would have kind of appreciated if they had done that, especially because historically, that's exactly what they did on other FTWs. Like, look at the 2080 Ti FTW3, the 1080 Ti FTW, the 1080 FTW, the actually I can't remember what they did on the 900 series. Actually, the reference cards on the 900 series were basically all SP those were basically all SP caps on output filtering. Also, and that's another, like, if you look at the Founders Edition, the Founders Edition has a all SMD polymer output filter for its VRMs as well. And so, and this is another one of those things that if you're a normal user really doesn't affect you. You'd honestly need an oscilloscope to see how much of a difference going for the through-hole capacitors over SMD capacitors would make. But, in my past experience, testing various GPUs, through-hole capacitors really suck. Like, they do. In terms of what that would actually mean for your overclocking, we're talking again like 10, 20 megahertz, which, it's not a huge difference, but it is a high-end 3080. I would have been expecting to see some capacitor upgrades. Or at least if you're going to use through-hole caps, don't use like APAC. Like, I know that I have a massive issue with these, but it's like, these are really kind of, like, I can't really think of any cheaper capacitors that would be acceptable for a, 3080 class card. So, yeah, but that's again like one of just a minor complaint in my, like, if you're a normal user, it really doesn't affect you, right? The main thing with the FTW3, if you're a regular overclocker and you don't plan to do any modding and you don't plan to take the card sub-zero, like, the main thing for you is, like, this card does have kind of official support for a really high power limit BIOS, but at the same time, there's other cards that also support high power limit BIOSes. And as far as I'm aware, there shouldn't really be any issue taking the FTW3 BIOS and sticking it on like literally any other 3080 because of the way NVIDIA voltage controllers work. And the way, like, NVIDIA GPUs, like, you can't customize the memory configuration. Micron is the only GDDR6X manufacturer out there. So it's not like you're, like, with, say, AMD cards, you need a specific BIOS depending on which memory you have, potentially. With NVIDIA, that's not a problem. These all use Micron because nobody else makes GDDR6X. So you won't have a memory compatibility problem. Your voltage controllers all use the exact same interface to communicate with the actual GPU, which is PWM vid. It doesn't care about the BIOS isn't going to affect that. So there really should be no issue taking EVGA's FTW3 BIOS and sticking it on basically any other card out there. And at that point, I'm just sitting here like, why? Like, where's the, like, maybe, like, better controllers, better caps would have been nice to see. Like, it's a very strong VRM, but you don't need a VRM this strong for just a 500 watt BIOS. Like, you can get away with that, but you should be able to get away with that BIOS on plenty of other cards. And so, like, yeah, it's just one of those things that, I'm like, that's the thing. I'm just not a fan of what EVGA has done here, especially because the other FTW3s would be like borderline Kingpin class, you know, PCBs. And then there's this one where it's like they took a reference card and stretched it. And you can really kind of see that in the like capacitor row over here. Like if you overlay a reference card on this, basically from here to like it literally aligns like something like that. The components all line up. And it's just like, so they added this top section. I'm not sure how much of this top section exactly, but they added that and basically changed nothing else. And so I was really expecting more. And so I'm a bit disappointed, you know, I'm kind of disappointed, but for, you know, daily system builds, it really doesn't affect you. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support us here at Gamers Nexus, we've got the Gamers Nexus store where you can pick up things like the mod mat, which you can see in the background of this video. We've also got a Patreon where you can support us directly. There's links to both down in the description. And yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.